Okay. Before we start, April, do you have any questions regarding appraisal or HOA?
No.
No, not at the moment. Okay. So today, it's not gonna be that long, but I just want to go over the appraisal part when you receive the appraisal for the investment property. So let me quickly share my screen. Okay. Do you guys see my screen? Do you guys see the appraisal report? Okay. So this is the one example of the appraisal report for the investment property. So when you guys get the appraisal report back for investment purchase, refinance, or any kinds of investment transactions, there are a few sections that you have to look for. Let's start from the page 1 of the appraisal report. So on the page 1, one thing you have to check is the occupant section for the investment property. If the occupant is checked as owner, it means that we can no longer proceed as investment if owner is occupying. If owner is occupying the subject, it means that it's a primary, which we cannot proceed as investment. So make sure for the investment property, either tenant or vacant should be checked. Uh, Sometimes for purchase file, subject property is vacant and the borrower wants to use their property as their investment property. If that happens, appraiser might check occupant type as vacant because there's no one living in the subject properties. But let's say, for example, for refinance transaction, it has to be tenant occupied. Sometimes it can be vacant, but it cannot be owner occupied for the investment. So please double check this part. If you see its owner, then you have to go back to the appraiser and to have them update the appraisal report. Okay. And then next thing that you'll have to look for is the rental income part. Sometimes, most of the cases when April's ordering appraisal for the investment property, we always have April order with 1007, the rent schedule. So this is the operating income statement. Can be either 216 or 1007. Either form is fine because both forms show rental income anyways. So in this case, we have 216, form 216. If you look at the form 216, you will see the current rent amount. If tenants are currently occupying the subject property, there should be current rent amount. So either we have to unload the lease agreement when we order the appraisal report, or if it's for the purchase transaction, then we can get lease estoppel from the escrow, the seller side. So the seller can provide how much rent they are collecting currently. But for refinance transaction, we'll always have to unload the lease agreement that we get from the borrower. So current rent will be the actual rent that borrower is collecting monthly. And on the right-hand side, there's a market rent per month. These are the comp that appraiser gets based on the market area, subject area. So it has to be similar. I would recommend the current rent should be similar or maybe lower because some investors do take the higher amount of the market rents between the actual rent and market rent. But some investors do not take the market rent if that's higher. So make sure that those two numbers are similar. If it's too much different, then you will have to ask me so we can find out the solution. If there's too much difference between the actual rent and then market rent, then it means that underwriter would question about the current rent that they are collecting. Maybe the underwriter would think that the current rent amount, maybe they're collecting based on the document only. They are not actually collecting it, but they just increase the rent amount per the lease agreement just to make this loan work. So to avoid those underwriter's assumption or any over conditions, let's make sure the rent amount and market rent are similar. So in this case, the current rent is 5,000 and it's 2 units. So there should be rent amount for each unit. If you look at the left-hand side, there's a unit number 1 and unit number 2, right? So each unit, the borrower is collecting 5,000 each. And market rent, it's around 4,600. It's lower than the actual, but it's around that range. So in this case, if we want to go with the actual rent amount, when we calculate any DSCR ratio or rental income into DTI calculation, we can use 5,000 if we provide the proof of 2-month rent income deposit. Let's say we can get 2-month bank statements from the borrower to show that borrower is actually collecting 5,000 a month per their bank statements, or they can give us canceled check copy that they get from the tenants. That can be fine. Anything that can prove the borrower is actually collecting this current rent amount, we can use the higher amount. But if we cannot get it, we have to always go with the lower of those two, just so you know. So most cases for investment transactions, we do DSCR. So DSCR is solely depends on the rent at the subject property. So it's very important to get the accurate rent amount when we get the appraisal report, because when we calculate DSCR ratio, we should be based off either the rent, the actual rent, or market rent, whichever is lower usually. Some lenders do take higher of those two, but we have to get an exception. So always to be safe, just go whatever it's lower. And if DSCR ratio is different from what we initially calculated, always let me know so we can restructure the file, or we can let LO know the DSCR ratio changed. So the rate might be changed. Okay, so make sure to check this section. Also, think there's a Proteno 7 here. So it's on the page 2 of appraisal. If you look at the page 2 here, appraisal list out the subject address with their specs, and he also listed out comps 1, 2, 3, the rental comps. So if you look at the rental comps here, rental comp 1, it has monthly rent 3,800 for each unit, and rental comp 2, it has 4,600 for each unit, and rental comp 3, it has 3,800 and 3,300 for each unit. That's why when he averages out these 3 comps, he gets less than 5,000. Although borrower collects actual 5,000, because market rent is not up to 5,000, it's around like 38, 3,000 or 4,000. That's why we can get the market comp matching with the actual rent amount. Okay, so when you're reviewing the appraisal for investment, make sure to check these comps. If borrower can provide any comps that have similar rent amount with the subject property, we may request appraiser reconsideration. We can provide the rental comps to the appraiser and have the appraiser re-review the comps to make the market rent go up a little bit. But based on my experience, always appraiser to stick with the original opinion that they had. But we may try if DSCR doesn't work with the market comp. If market comp comes in very lower than we expected, we may try with reconsideration. It depends on the scenario. Okay. So if you scroll down a little bit, it also has rent comp for the subject. So as we saw on the form 216, appraiser also put 5,000 for each unit, and opinion of market rent is 4,600. Again, because all the rental comps that we see is under 5,000, the market rent that we see for the subject property is less than the 5,000, right? So make sure to check that. Yeah, I think that's it. And one more thing though, when you see for the occupants, if you see the tenants occupy, make sure to check the photos of the appraisal report, because sometimes appraiser checked that tenants are occupying the subject, but when you see the photos, the bedrooms are completely blank. if that's the case, then we can say that this subject property is occupied by someone if it's totally vacant, right? So if that's the case, you will have to reach out to LO, ask that, well, appraiser came back saying that they are tenant occupied, but photos don't look like that tenants are occupying the subject property. So can you confirm with the borrower why the bedrooms are vacant? Then we may get the explanation and have the appraiser get additional photos maybe, or update the occupant type to vacant if it's actually vacant. So photos and occupant must be consistent. Okay. So make sure to check those photos as well. Yep. I think that's it for the investment property appraisal. Is there any questions regarding this? Nope. Okay. Did we cover FHA appraisal report in our last training? We did? Okay. Hannah, I'll share the playlist for the weekly meetings for each department so you can go over. And starting from tomorrow, I would like you to cover some files on your end. And Sydney, if you can shadow Hannah's work until she is fully delegated on senior processing. So let's do that way. Okay. If you guys don't have any questions, then I'll see you guys next Monday's meeting. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.